technology cannot take that human emotion, translate it into the right next best action, so to speak, right? Building frictionless experiences, and where everybody talks about like, oh, automate, automate, automate. I don't agree that that's always the answer, because having that human touch is really important. And you know, there's also that aspect that having that little bit of friction in the experience was necessary. When you think about a business, you're thinking about it's a sports team that you're running to get the maximum performance out of it. As long as you have the most fundamental basic data, you can use AI, and you can remove that element of friction in a customer's workflow. But it's really with a lot of caution, because it's not just about providing the wrong experience, it's about like dangerous situations, right? So hence the human in the loop is still very critical.
Hello, and welcome to the Frictionless Experience, the podcast where we lay waste to digital friction. I'm Chuck Moxley.
And I'm Nick Palladino.
Today, we're excited to welcome Noopur Bakshi to our podcast. Noopur brings a wealth of experience and insight into product management and customer experience. Her career spans several tech giants, including Adobe and Salesforce, and she's currently at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, where she leads a digital experience for their support center. Noopur is a thought leader in creating frictionless yet secure digital experiences, and today she's here to share her insights on the evolution of customer experience in the digital age, the role of AI and data in enhancing these experiences, and her passion for finding the perfect balance between technological advancement and human touch in customer service. Noopur, welcome to the Frictionless Experience.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
We're excited to have you. Now, I want to start because I understand you're a big sports fan, Noopur. Tell us about that and how that relates back to how you're able to relate that back to business.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. So yes, I used to play sports when I was in high school, but now watching it from the couch is a better proposition for my health. But I'm a huge sports fan. I watch the NBA, I watch the NFL. I'm also a huge Formula One fan. If anybody watches, it's going on right now. And yes, Max Verstappen is my favorite. I'm not taking any questions about that one. But really, the reason that is so interesting to me is that I see the true connection. Like when you think about a business, you're thinking about it's a sports team that you're running to get the maximum performance out of it, right? So I see that overlap is so huge, and you can learn so much from just watching a sport, from watching someone, whether they're struggling or whether they're the top of the sport, just understanding how strategy works, how teamwork brings everything together. And so for me, that has been a huge connecting thread, where my passion for watching sports, but bringing it back to my day-to-day in product management, and being able to build my leadership skills in product and in people leadership. Watching sports has been a huge part of like my, work-life balance, so to speak, to bring it all together.
Yeah, and the athletic spirit is also great in the workplace, because you can use that athletic spirit to be able to say, "Hey, I'm accountable for my actions, and I'm also accountable for my success." And so, as you're kind of bringing that sports analogy, I love hearing that. I'm a former athlete myself, amateur athlete, of course, but former athlete myself. But definitely love the athletic spirit.
And I was not an athlete.
Hey, but
and who's surprised by that?
That's the great part, Chuck. Like, you don't have to be an athlete to watch sports, right? Hey, you have a couch, you have a TV. That's all you need, really. And maybe a streaming subscription these days, but yeah.
That's true. Although I will warn you, if you get into too many sports analogies, I will probably mix metaphors in some way. So, can I ask you about your current role and what you and your team are focused on?
Yeah. So in the past 6 to 7 years, I've been focused on building delightful customer service experiences, to be precise. So in my current role, I lead product management for our HPE support center. So this is the portal where, if you've bought products from the company and you have a problem, you want to open a case, you want to try to see if you can fix it yourself. You want to understand, what other functions and features do you have that you can use. So the digital portal experience is what my team builds for the HP product suite. And in the past, as you mentioned, I was part of the product team at Salesforce and Service Cloud, where again I built the core of the Service Cloud product, which is essentially the tool for companies to have, intelligent, automated experiences along with that human touch of agents to be able to provide the right customer experience to their end users, not just in the time of an issue, but really through the customer lifecycle.
That's interesting. When you think about that post-purchase support process and your experiences there, what are some of the challenges you face in ensuring that it is frictionless, that those experiences are frictionless?
So, I think the challenge with the, I guess it's the connection of looking at that customer journey and being able to find the right technology that's going to support the true end to end, right? Because technology is a lot more discrete and human experiences are extremely nuanced. And so there is that, you can have frictionless experiences for some really basic, low hanging fruit. Yes, you want to reset your password. Yeah, easy peasy, right? But more often than not, the issue is a lot more nuanced, right? Like, hey, I can give you an example of a situation where this was with Delta Airlines. I'm a frequent flyer, and Delta is my airline of choice. And this goes back to that customer loyalty piece. Why I continue to fly with Delta, even though they charge a lot more, right? In terms of being able to build that connection, the way this is an example of how things can be done well. But when you realize what that underlying technology, what kind of things can go wrong. I was on the East Coast and I had a bit of a personal emergency and I had to come back to the West Coast. Now, how do I rebook my ticket? How do I do it quickly? Especially because I'm in this state of mind where I'm harrowed. I want to be able to come back. Technology doesn't yet know that, right? It's not sentient. Well, some AI models are, but technology cannot take that human emotion, translate it into the right next best action, so to speak, right? So in this case, I had to call Delta Airlines to talk to a human being. And so I think that's where I see, right? Like building frictionless experiences, and where everybody talks about like, oh, automate, automate, automate. I don't agree that that's always the answer, because having that human touch is really important. And you know, there's also that aspect that having that little bit of friction in the experience was necessary. It was necessary for me to talk to an agent and say, hey, I have an emergency. I need to get back. What's the quickest way? Right. And this person was able to empathize, which was key for me at the moment, but also troubleshoot and brainstorm like, well, I can't get you back to San Francisco, but I see you're in the Bay Area. There's these other airports. Would those work for you? Can I take a look at a flight that'll get you back to one of those airports, right? Not something you can have like frictionless end to end, at least not yet, with just having automation.
I like this idea of necessary friction. I want to unpack that a little bit more, because as we're kind of talking about building a frictionless experience, when is feature functionality, or the human touch, as you put it, when does it become appropriate to add some friction points so that the experience becomes better in itself? It's an interesting line of thinking. I like it.
Yeah, I feel like look at any situation, right? Like again, it comes down to the fact that we're humans, and as much as we want to not have to deal with issues, sometimes we just need that other human on the other side to listen to. It brings to mind that the Discover ad campaign, right? When they have the ad where they have the clone of the person calling in on the other side. And I think that's what's important, right? You need to be able to relate to that other side to have a frictionless experience, but it has friction because you make a phone call, try to get someone who would listen to you, and hopefully get lucky that that person is going to be empathetic.
Yeah, I think the emotion is a very interesting idea there, because there are circumstances in support where emotion plays a part, and there are times when it doesn't. I remember Joe from Equifax. On the episode we talked about, where he talked about they were forcing people to phone, and they wanted to stop doing that. They wanted to make it that easier because it was not an emotional experience. In your example, I think that's a great example of emotion, and I really think the airlines have done a pretty good job of making those experiences frictionless. I fly American, and I was in our office actually in the East Coast, and I was in meetings and I kept getting notification that my flight was delayed 30 minutes. Then it was delayed another 30 minutes, delayed 30 minutes. And it was one of those things where I was starting to get distracted and go, oh man, I'm going to have to jump on the line. Instead, they brought up a thing, said, click here. I was able to go do it in a quick break in the meeting, book a different flight, and then go back to my meeting. That was a great case where I didn't need the emotion. I didn't need that piece of it. So but that's a challenge. Like, how do you either offer that in every case, or how do you anticipate when emotion is going to play a bigger challenge in it and you need a person versus don't need a person? Is there a way to do that?
I think it's a really hard nut to crack, right? It is more of a, I think, experiment that you have to look at. Is it, for example, in this airline case, right? Like, did you have a connection that you were going to miss if your flight changed, right? And it is something where maybe AI can help, but maybe, it's just more of a human decision where, like, hey, this person has multiple connections. We may have to like rebook a couple of different flights. Maybe it's better to get them on the phone to try and understand what is it on the other end. Like, are they okay with a delayed flight? Like, if we were to give them an upgrade, would it be okay if they flew tomorrow versus the delayed flight today? So I feel like that's something we're still figuring out. And it's just an ad hoc thing that you look at whether you get right or not. And then you can start to see if there are trends on how you can do some things differently, and look at the trend and kind of focus on that trend, right? Hey, there's a trend that if there's weather delays that are not during a holiday season, then a business traveler is more open to just taking that next flight the next day. And so you can do that booking and say, hey, here, we rebooked you already. Let us know if this was the wrong thing to do, right? So that's that input you can get, and you can build on that. But that's where the data part comes in, right? Like, how kosher is your data, and how, are you taking all those nuances of really knowing your use case? Because if you did that in the same scenario I just talked about, maybe someone who was going off on a holiday who only has 7 days of break, and you say, oh, can we send you on this flight 24 hours later? Well, you already took 1 day off of their vacation. They've had to rebook stuff that they're traveling in. So it's really important that when you're making those decisions, especially if you're trying to automate them, that you have the right data to go with it.
Yeah, I have a personal story that's similar in this flight realm. I was trying to get back from my honeymoon, actually, and I was supposed to fly back on Thursday. And there is only one flight that leaves the whole island of St. Lucia, and they decided to cancel it. And then the next flight out was the next Saturday. I had to extend my vacation by 3 days. My honeymoon, no less. And, I was booked in one of those like butler suites. So I'm spending like way more money than I should be, freshly married. And, that was a lot of friction, but like with the airline. But then, the frictionless part came with all the margaritas after.
Did you have to switch to a Ramada at the hotel for your last 3 days? So, okay. Well, what we're touching on is kind of interesting as we start to think about AI, right? Because now we're using that artificial intelligence. What are some of the ways you're looking at integrating AI into and these new technologies into what you're doing while still maintaining that trust and security for the customer data and also being, conscious of the emotional part or human side?
I think kind of everybody should be probably is in this boat where we're approaching it with caution, right? There is the aspect of low hanging fruit where it's like really basic stuff. You know that as long as you have the most fundamental basic data, you can use AI, and you can remove that element of friction in a customer's workflow. But it's really with a lot of caution, because it's not just about providing the wrong experience, it's about like dangerous situations, right? So hence the human in the loop is still very critical. So I don't think in this answer I would be any different from what most companies or anyone is actually doing with AI, and that I believe is the right way, right? Like sometimes you're like, oh, let me go the path less traveled. You can try, but you have to do it really with caution because AI is still very in its very fledgling state. As much as everyone should be thinking about it, because really that's the future. You have to be really careful, and that's really the advice I would give is that make sure you think about it, but make sure you think about it and keep in mind what that means to your users. And so focus on the outcome. What outcome are you looking for, and what risk are you taking to get to that outcome?
So one thing that I'm struggling with in this age of AI, I'm going to call it AI marketing for now, and I'm going to say that very specifically, because where does automation stop and AI starts? Because to me, what most people are calling AI nowadays is just what we would have called automation 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even 1 year ago. And now all of a sudden people are saying, hey, look at my AI. It's so awesome. I'm sorry. Why is that not just automation? And that's where I'm struggling with. Where does that line start and stop?
So I actually agree with you, right? Like automation is the superset because when you look at automation up until now, as you said, it was more rules based, right? That's the difference. Right now we always thought about automation as like RPA and like if this then what, etc. So essentially it wasn't intelligent. And now with AI and machine learning and the models you can build, the output is intelligent, but it's still automation at the end of the day. I think it's at this point we're just about semantics, to be honest.
Yeah, that's interesting because when you like Chat GPT is everybody's AI like example, like the primary one, of course. But to me, it's just a reskinned version of Google search. So has Google search always been AI?
No, no. So the distinction there, right? Again, it goes back to the treatment you're giving to the data that you have. It is again, uh, repeating myself here, but it is basically a intelligent search, right? So this is no longer about just looking at data and having a kind of a one-off analysis and presenting you with that data, right? With AI, it is a lot more about one collecting data from a lot of different sources, which is like a lot I mean, yes, Google searches takes a pretty huge set of data sets there, but when you look at the likes of ChatGPT and OpenAI, that set is so much bigger. And now when you try to apply it into the enterprise use case, you can build your own kind of little playing ground where you want only data in the context that you have, but you can still use the data from the internet, right? That's what a lot of companies are doing because, of course, there's this fear that we're going to share all of your proprietary data out into the wild, right? That was where that line was, where Google cannot share proprietary data with you. But as a company that's trying to employ AI, now you can take what you have in the internet, take the data that's contextual to you as a company, and build your infrastructure so that you're able to use the value of something like OpenAI, but for your particular use case, which is kind of different from what a Google search would give you.
You touched on something when you were talking about it. You used the term danger, that there's danger with AI, and you talked about being cautious. What are some of those dangers or things people think about? Is it ethical? Is it legal? When you talk, or is it doing something dumb, or that PR nightmare like Google had with their image tool, for example?
Well, I mean,
What's that danger?
I think it's a little bit of all of the above, right? If you were looking at it from a business perspective, I think the biggest is the ethical and legal, implications, right? So there was an example with Air Canada recently, where the chatbot went ahead and promised someone like a refund or a new ticket, And then the company didn't follow through. And so the person tried to sue the company, and Air Canada came up with this weird reasoning saying the chatbot was its own entity, and so the Air Canada couldn't be sued for it. It was the most bizarrest, article that I read, and I'm like, that's something they should have thought through before, because they didn't do the due diligence in terms of what the chatbot was able to spit out based on the models they had built, and now they were being sued for it. So from a business perspective, there's definitely a lot of like legal and ethical complications that companies should be worried about. And as a personal user, you always want to take it with a bit of grain of salt, right? Because I've seen so many experiences, right? When even though the technologies are maturing a lot more now, but even now, you ask AI a question and it will extremely confidently give you the wrong answer, and you might not know the difference, right? Like, how do you verify that? And so I think you have to be a little skeptical. It's still, technology is still kind of emerging. It's not quite all there. So I would say that that's what I would look out for. Personally, you just want to take it with a grain of salt that this is really the right answer. And then, as a company, I think the legal and ethical obligations are huge.
Yeah, I saw you speak on a panel about that Air Canada example, and I thought the dumbest line in that whole thing was Air Canada tried to tell them, because the guy followed the instructions the bot gave him, and then they refused to give him the refund on it or the discount. And they said, well, he shouldn't have relied on their own chatbot for the instructions. It's like, well, if you can't rely on it, and to your point, I'm sure it was it wasn't like the chatbot that I think maybe used, this is how you should do it. It said, this is the process, right?
And I mean, see, that's where this guy is smart enough. He took screenshots, or like he saved the conversation. So he actually had, data to tell them, like, listen, you definitely told me I could do this. And that was, critical. Like this whole, the story that, oh, it's its own legal entity, that's never going to fly, right? That's why it's very important. It goes back to that human in the loop. It's like, do you really want to send this message to that external customer without somebody looking at it and making sure it aligns to your policies and that you're okay with it?
Yeah. So I saw your keynote from Salesforce, which I just thought was so fascinating, and I guess that was technically Service Cloud, where if you haven't seen it, you should go. It's out on the web. You just got to sign up through Salesforce. But it basically was, if I get this correct, it was Service Cloud, and you walk through kind of almost a day in the life, or here's how it would operate. And it was just super fascinating, very, very well done keynote. And I know we talked a little bit about this in the prep. You said that was like days of rehearsals and all of that, because it came off very natural. And my favorite part was when you had a drink from the bartender in the middle of the thing, which is a whole nother story. But I'm curious because you were doing some really amazing things at Salesforce. What drew you to your current role, and what were you looking maybe to bring from that? Because you must have learned a ton wow at Salesforce and all those crazy things you're doing with AI there.
Yeah. And so the context here is, at Salesforce, I was building Service Cloud, right? This is the product that Salesforce sells to customers that are looking to build out their customer service organizations. And they use the functionality that we build in the app, where you can stand up a portal, you can stand up chatbots, you can have a service console for your agents. And obviously, Salesforce has started working on building a lot of AI capabilities into the product. So for me, this new role was really about drinking my own champagne. At Service Cloud, I would talk about, oh, you should just go do this is the best practice, right? And my new role here, because I have to actually basically take Service Cloud and build that customer support portal and that experience for our customers, it's given me a window and an exclusive view into the other aspects that go into building that experience, right? Going back to that, the point where we don't take into account that human touch. We don't take into account that humans are building this technology, right? So there is an element of, yes, the Service Cloud product has all these awesome functionalities and features. How does that relate to my business? how does that matter to the products that my company sells? How do my customers consume this output that I'm providing in terms of a service experience? And that's really where all the nuances come in. So for me, that was a challenge that I was looking at, is like taking what I had built, but then seeing it truly from the customer's eyes, right? Like we're always looking to do research where, when I was at Salesforce, we used to shadow agents, see how they use our console. I used to shadow, how customers went through their journeys. And that point in time feedback was great for us to be able to build better products. But this role, I'm literally like diving deep in and having to do this from, looking at all the potential stakeholders I have internally, the external customers, what's important to one business unit may not be important to another one, having to prioritize that and still have a frictionless, unified experience for the end user. That's the challenge that, keeps me getting up every day and, doing this new job right now.
That's awesome. One of the things that we've talked about on the podcast in the past with several guests is this idea that when you think about post-purchase service, or even your most frequent customers, when you screw up, when you have friction in that process and they're prevented from being able to complete whatever transaction they want, the pain is actually greater. Because they're already a customer, right? And so the loyalty and that factor, how do you guys think about that? And how does that inform the way you're thinking about those journeys and building out the frictionless experiences?
So, this was an independent survey. I don't quite remember the firm that did that, right? But there was a survey about like, how much does the service experience impact your loyalty to a brand? And the numbers were staggering that the end customer experience is extremely important to the brand that you use. And then when you think about it for a bit, it'd be like, oh, actually, that makes exact sense, right? Like going back to me being a Delta frequent flyer, I pay a lot more for several of my flights because Delta is just more expensive. But will I walk away from it? No, because that every single time Delta's had my back. And it is in those moments where things go wrong, where they know how to come back and fix it in, timely fashion, in a contextual fashion, right? Like how and why it matters to me as a person. That's been important. And so I think that's like the key, is that the customer experience is extremely important to brand loyalty, even when things go bad, as long as that experience is helping you get to the other side and you end on a good note. That's what's going to change the way somebody looks at your brand, right? So of course you need to have a product that's, good enough and that somebody wants to purchase your product. But at the end of the day, it's not about how many times things went wrong. It's about how you recovered from how many times those things went wrong.
I'll tell you, I am also a very loyal Delta customer. And that's mostly because I live in Atlanta. So
there you go.
Almost everyone in Atlanta flies Delta, and like that's it. But it's funny you're telling me that Delta is that much more expensive. I wouldn't even have been able to tell you that. That's how loyal to Delta I am. All I do is I shop Delta, period. Done. Like I'm not checking American or United or anything else. It's just a way of life in Atlanta, I guess.
Yeah, and this is funny because like none of us work at Delta, but this seems like this is like a Delta appreciation podcast here. If Delta's listening, we are loyal customers. But no, it's true, right? Like I just, I'll give you another example, right? I'm still faithful to Delta, inspired as you would know, Nick. They changed the way you get status this year. They made it harder, right? And they made it a lot harder. And one, I kind of get why, right? Like during the pandemic, almost every airline did this. Like they let you keep status. And so as soon as like the world started to open up again, all the lounges was super crowded, right? It was crazy. And so they made it harder to get status. And I still continue to be a loyal Delta customer. And I'm still vying to get the status because really the perks, it comes back to the value that you're getting and the value that a customer perceives. Automation or no automation, right? It's a perception. And if that perception is a good perception, then people will stick with the brand. Like at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
Well, and in the case where you're talking about an airline, and I've heard the same argument with banks, the switching costs are high. You know, if you've built up your status over years with the airline, you're not going to, it's not going to be one bad incident. You're like, that's it. I'm done. I'm never flying you again. Same thing with the bank. You know, the switching costs are high. You got to change out all your direct deposits and all those things. But I do think something you're saying is very interesting. It's a pattern over time. If I have a bunch of bad experiences and there's friction in resolving them over time, I will tire of that, right? And that's when that'll hurt the loyalty, and I will make the effort to switch even in a high loyalty category
Yeah.
like that.
I also think there's one thing to call out is that first impressions matter, right? And so to Nick's point, right, again, going back to this whole, the way Delta was doing rewards was going to change this year. So we contemplated, we're like, hey, is there another airline out there that maybe we should try? We're in San Francisco. We have a lot of options around here. And we flew Alaska to Seattle because it was a direct flight. It was, reasonable. It was extremely cheap. And, in terms of first impressions, I can tell you, I'm never flying Alaska again if I have the option, because that customer service experience was, again, when things go wrong, and things go wrong all the time, it's how the result ends up. With Alaska, what happened was they canceled our flight as we were heading to the airport. They sent us a notification and they rebooked us, right? And you're like, oh, well, that's a good enough outcome. They rebooked us from Seattle to San Francisco 9 hours after our original time. I could have started driving and just about kind of made it a few more hours, right? And then I had to go through this entire thing of talking to 5 different people to try to get us back to the Bay Area, right? It was about, if you talk to Delta, they, like I said, they said, hey, there are these other airports. Can I get you into one of these other airports? Alaska never asked me that. In fact, when I asked the guy, like, what about the other airports in the Bay Area? This was the gate agent that was helping us change the tickets. He said, does LAX work for you? And I'm like, you're a flight gate agent and you think LAX is in the Bay Area? I don't even want to continue the rest of this conversation, right? Yeah. And so I think it goes back to having that, what we call first run experiences, right? That first run experience has to be absolutely solid. And then you have to build on top of that.
Yeah, I love that. I'm about to make myself out to be a liar here in a second, but I have a bad airline story that wasn't Delta, but it was United and canceling my flight. Then I had to go book another flight on Spirit, and then they canceled my flight. And it was due to bad weather. They were all canceling for the same reasons. But I ended up having to take a little jump jet from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia to make a dinner in time in New Jersey. And I drove from Philadelphia to New Jersey, but I wasn't able to fly directly into New Jersey. And so it was just this like whole nightmare situation of dealing with all of it. And I just had to just kind of deal with it. Right. And it was one of those moments where I just sat back and said, man, this is just awful. Like, it's not what you want to deal with, but it was all canceled on me, right? The morning of.
Yeah. And, speaking of these human interactions and the touch point and why it's still important in this world of AI and automation, our puppy is now 3 years old, but if you've ever interacted with Chewy.com, right? And with Chewy.com, like, I've heard so many experiences where, especially when people who've had older pets that pass and, hey, guess what? I have this entire 10 pounds of kibble that I bought and then my dog passed suddenly. Can I just donate it or send it back? And, the policy at Chewy is not just that they will refund the money, they will donate that bag. They send you card and flowers and that human touch. Maybe you can program an AI to do it, I don't know, in the next decade. But having that in that moment of grief, there's no AI or automation right now that's going to actually, be able to support that kind of interaction.
Yeah, we have 3 dogs and we get for each of their birthdays, we get a card from Chewy that's handwritten. I'm sorry, how many customers does Chewy's have that they're handwriting these things? Holy cow, what kind of job does it take to get that?
Although it could be a computer writing it that it looks like it's handwritten.
Oh, well, if
Okay, Chuck, you're too skeptical. Come on now.
if that's the truth, that's good AI. Like, let's
Yeah,
answer
there
the
you go. There
automation
you go.
because the A's were not the same A's. I always know how to look out for it. You look for one specific character, and then you look and see if they're like very like insanely similar. And if they're insanely similar versus close, then you know it's handwritten or typed. Now, if AI could create an AI font that makes it look like it's handwritten, hey, you could probably do it. But that's the difference between AI and automation right there. Automation is just get a type font that has the 26 letters 2 times and then print it. AI is figure out how to convince that, hey, this is the same handwriting, but different. I love it.
It seems like there'd be a prompt for that, like write a letter in the handwriting of Thomas Jefferson saying I can't make the party. And it would pick up his font and his style, you would think. It's interesting. One of the things you said were when the end result is, can you solve the problem? How does the problem get solved? Problems are going to happen in a service experience. There was actually a study done by Harvard Business School years ago that a customer who experiences a problem and has a good resolution is actually more loyal than a customer who never experiences a problem, who just has flawless experiences the whole time. All right. So talking about that human element, and when we think about proactive customer service, so in other words, how do we anticipate what the customer is going to need and what the next best step is, while also at the same time avoid being creepy with those personalized experiences? How do you think about that?
That's a tough one. I think again, this is a experiment in learning to take the feedback from customers and to learn over time, right? So you can start with some basic things like Nick said, right? Like Chewy sends him birthday cards for his dog's birthdays, right? You can continue in that vein in terms of like, hey, you're ready for, you have this like, based on the last time you bought the kibble, you're probably ready to get another bag of kibble, and then use that information to go back and train the model and say, okay, it does look like whatever 3.5 months is when that kibble needs to arrive. And then you start to automate that process where it's like, instead of just asking like, hey, do you need kibble right now, it's like, hey, we're about to send you kibble, say yes or no, right? And you start to build on that. So that's really how I see where you find the balance, that you're not creepy because you have built that relationship over time and you've asked the customer, like, I know this about you, is this good? Okay, well, now I know this, right? So you're not suddenly starting up and like, Nick, I see you on the dogs, right? Like, it doesn't come out of the blue. It's about building that relationship over time. And then, I mean, we're all kind of a bit desensitized in the sense of how much information is out there about us. But even then, like if somebody were to come in and suddenly tell me, I know all these other things about you, so I'm going to recommend this, like I'm going to be like freaked out. But if it's something that was built over time and I'm expecting it, I think that's how you take that creepiness element out of it.
That makes a lot of sense. So, Noopur, what's a commonly held belief about delivering frictionless digital experiences that you just fundamentally disagree with? You think that people get wrong?
So, I think I talked about this earlier, right? The fact that frictionless experiences lead to better customer service, I don't agree with that. I think sometimes that little friction can actually go a long way in building true customer loyalty, because again, it is about how you feel at the end, even if it meant there was some friction involved.
Super interesting. So what are one or two key takeaways for the audience that they can start applying immediately in their businesses from our conversation today?
So I think no matter what you're thinking about, right, whether it's how you want to do AI or how to just do better customer service, you have to focus on the outcomes you want, and you have to think about, is this outcome for my customer or is this outcome for my business, right? Because you are running a business and you have to figure out where that overlap is for a customer outcome that is unique, differential, and is delightful for the customer, and what that matters to your business. So thinking about outcomes is really how I think, just across product management, no matter what you're thinking about outcomes makes sense. The second In this world where we all want to have our AI automation strategy all together, there's something that you probably heard me say in some of those recordings you've seen, is that AI is only as good as the data it's rooted in. And so I would highly recommend that before you jump into building an AI strategy, go back and look at the foundations. Are the foundations really solid? Do you have like the right metrics? Do you have the right data connected in the right places? Do you have all the data? Or, you probably don't have all the data, but do you have enough data to make decisions that are sound and, well, not creepy, not unethical, not on legal boundaries? So I think those are kind of the key things that I constantly think about, is like, what is the outcome you're looking for? And what is the right experience, whether it's aided by automation and AI, or whether it's a human experience? Is it the right experience in terms of the context? And what does it mean for the end user?
Yeah, that last part about having the data is very interesting. Over the years, I've worked with a lot of big companies, and it's really interesting when you get in and start poking around the data and find out that the customer is represented in 5 different repositories that don't talk to each other. And so they can look like 5 different customers, or you can have repetitive information. And if that data hasn't been normalized, I would imagine that presents a lot of challenges for companies that want to then tap AI and do some of these advanced things.
And I mean, that's such a reality, right? Like, I think we kind of gloss over it, but that exact example, right? Because look at any company, and especially any big company, you have all these acquisitions, and you're bringing companies together. Data is siloed. How do you bring it together? And that's key, right? You have to figure out a way to connect those dots before you start applying all this AI, because you are going to get the wrong output, right? It's really like, if you have crap in, you're going to get crap out, right? So AI is really only as good as what you feed it.
This has been a great conversation. I wish we had like hours, because feel like we could talk a lot of there. I feel like we barely scratched the surface. Where can listeners find you and maybe connect with you? What's the best way to do that?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and you can find me if you just look for me with my full name, Noopur Bakshi. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Threads, but those opinions are all personal and mostly sports related. But hey, feel free to follow me in Threads. I'm no longer on Twitter or X, just a personal choice at that point. But those are, the areas that you can find me.
Oh, so you're the one on Threads. No, I'm kidding. Well, thanks for tuning into this episode of The Frictionless Experience. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcast player app so you can automatically receive notifications when we upload new episodes. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Also, let us know what you want us to cover. We're happy to cover anything that's causing you friction in your digital experiences. And of course, you can find and connect with me and Nick on LinkedIn. Today, Noopur discussed the nuances of customer journeys to build experiences that are not just frictionless, but also deeply secure and trustworthy, the integration of AI and data, and the crucial human touch in creating memorable customer experiences. To recap, here are 3 frictionless ideas to take the smooth path to trust and loyalty.
Number 1, focus on customer outcomes. Businesses should prioritize the results they deliver to customers. This involves not just solving their immediate issues, but also foreseeing and addressing potential future needs. Number 2, verify the accuracy of the AI technology that you leverage. Given the ethical and legal implications, it's crucial to scrutinize the AI technologies you plan to implement, ensuring they are reliable and uphold your brand's integrity. Or else, you might be the next headline, like Air Canada's chatbot fiasco. So the integration of AI into customer service technologies must be approached with caution. Number 3, personalize your customer interactions. Even as you scale your customer service operations, strive to personalize interactions. Use data intelligently to understand customer preferences without crossing into intrusive territory. Noopur stressed that while AI and automation are transforming customer support processes, the human element remains critical, especially in complex or sensitive situations. Using examples from Delta and Chewy.com, Noopur pointed out how empathetic and personalized customer service can significantly enhance brand loyalty.
And on a final thought, businesses should view customer service not just as a support function, but as a critical component of the customer experience. This perspective shift can transform customer interactions from being simple transactions to opportunities for building long-term trust and loyalty.